Hello and welcome to this MBL webinar on the topic of lending between friends and family, a guide for private client lawyers. My name is Tom Samuels. I'm a barrister at Henderson Chambers in London. I have a general commercial practice, but I see a lot of issues involving financial services and consumers. And that is the context in which I very often see cases and issues involving loans between friends and family. There are, in my experience, two contexts in which you tend to see these issues arise. The first question is what I call at the front end of the transaction, which are parties coming to you asking the question, can we do this? And if so, how? And more commonly, in fact, at the back end of the transaction, where they've already done it, things have gone not quite as they had hoped. And after the event, a dispute has arisen and they want to know what their rights and obligations to one another are. So the purpose of today's session is to help you understand what you might be doing in either of those situations, either at the time the parties want to set up the transaction or after it's all gone wrong and they are already in a dispute. The biggest problem in this context, in my experience, is unknown unknowns, i.e. that the advisors who are helping, particularly at the beginning of the transaction, are simply unaware of the legislative provisions and the regulatory regime which might possibly apply to these sorts of transactions. And so they give no thought to it, they give no advice about it, and the parties go merrily on their way, being none the wiser. But when things do go wrong, if they go wrong, problems then arise because no advice was given on those matters at the outset. So I hope that what you will get out of today's session is, even if not a detailed understanding of all of the regulatory materials and the regime, you'll know that it's out there and you'll know that it is a potential issue, and at least then you will be able to ask for help from others if needed, if there are any particular questions or concerns. So today's session is going to cover three things on that basis. First of all, I'm going to give an overview of the regulatory regime, in particular under the Financial Services and Markets Act. I'm going to look at how one works out whether one's in that regime and what the consequences of getting it wrong might be under the Act. Secondly, I'm going to go through very briefly a checklist for those who are facing these kinds of issues, both at the front end and at the back end. And then lastly, we're going to look at a couple of worked scenarios, which I have created based on matters which I've been instructed on in the past, to look at how these issues manifest on a set of facts.